Have you ever started a new role and realized that nobody was actually evaluating you against the job description? They were actually evaluating you against the person who came before you. I need to say that one more time. You weren't always being evaluated against the profession. Sometimes you were being evaluated against the habits of the person who came before you. And if you've ever lived through that, you already know how painful it can be because you have 10 years of experience. You have the certifications, you have the education, you have the receipts. You can know exactly what good, no, exceptional leadership looks like and still walk into an organization where someone says, well, that's not how the person before you did it. And suddenly you're not being measured against the profession. You're being measured against history. I know what that feels like because I lived it. And I challenged something I believe deeply as a professional. I walked into an organization with experience, confidence, and a vision for how I believe I could contribute. But somewhere along the way, I realized my experience wasn't the only thing shaping the role. The history of the organization was shaping it too. The expectations were already there. The habits were already there. The scoreboard, well, you know, it had already been running. And I was stepping into a game that had already started long before I arrived. Sometimes you're starting against someone else's scoreboards. Years ago, when I stepped into that project management environment where certain expectations had already been established before I arrived, the person who had previously operated in that environment was highly respected and done a lot to help the organization succeed. And I wanted to be very clear about something. This is not criticism of that person. Sometimes organizations are small, resources are limited. People wear multiple hats. Great employees see a gap and simply say, hey, you know what? I'll take care of that. Now that's leadership. That's teamwork. That's what good people do. But here's what I didn't understand at the time. Organizations have a funny way of turning yesterday's extra efforts into the job description. Things may have started as, I'll help with that, eventually became, the project manager handles that. So when I arrived, I wasn't walking into an empty room. I was walking into history. There were established expectations about a project manager or what a project manager did. There were established relationships. There were established ways of communicating. There were established definitions of what good looked like. And there were responsibilities that had quietly migrated from one role to another without anybody necessarily stopping to ask, should this still work this way? Now here's where the conflict began. I came from an enterprise project management mindset. I had no problem helping out. Family, if something needs to get done, I can help the team move forward. And I'm probably, I definitely will roll up my sleeves to help. But there's a difference between saying I can help you with that and saying I own that. Those are two completely different standards. My approach was essential. I'll help you get caught up. But we need to understand where the long-term accountability belongs. And I couldn't understand what created so much friction until much later. They call that hindsight. I was having a conversation with an experienced PMO leader who had previously worked inside that same environment. As we talked about what I experienced, this person took the time to acknowledge something that changed how I saw the entire situation. When the team had been much smaller, people simply took things on. Well, of course, yeah, that made sense. But as an organization grew, the role should have evolved too. They hadn't evolved at the same pace. And suddenly everything just clicked. I wasn't necessarily being compared against project management. I was being compared against an expectation that had been created long before I arrived. And that's when I realized something. Sometimes you're starting against someone else's scoreboard. Here's a reflection, family. I had to sit with that realization for a while because once I understood what happened, I could have used that information to blame someone else around me. I could become bitter. I could have been frustrated. Well, I was frustrated. Okay. And I was a little bit bitter, but I could have blamed leadership. I could have blamed the people who created those expectations. I could have blamed the person who came before me. And maybe you've done that too. You walked into a new organization and started thinking, why didn't somebody fix this? Why does everybody think this is normal? Who created that process? Why am I being held accountable for something I didn't create? Those are fair assessments and fair questions. But eventually, I had to ask myself a much harder question. What if understanding how the scoreboard got here matters more than finding someone to blame for the score? See, that changed the conversation for me because I wasn't there when those decisions were made. I wasn't there when those habits were created. I didn't know which decision had been temporary solutions to very real problems. I didn't even know what pressures the people before me were facing. All I knew was a score I inherited. And that's when this stopped being a story about project management and it became a lesson about trust. Because every time we enter a new environment, we aren't simply bringing our experiences into the room, we're walking into other people's experiences too, their expectations, their disappointments, their successes, their relationships, their memories, their trust, and all of that may have been accumulating long before we arrive. So before you judge the scoreboard, you need to understand the game you just entered. What if you're questioning your performance based on the score that started accumulating before you entered the game? Principle number one, you inherit expectations you didn't create. Think about a basketball game. You walk into the arena at halftime. You look up at the scoreboard. Home, 52. Visitors, 31. And you're playing for the visiting team. The coach looks at you and says, "You're in." Wait a minute. You didn't miss those shots. You didn't commit those turnovers. You didn't even create the defensive strategy. You weren't on the floor when the team went on a 15-point run. Why didn't the coach step in and at least call timeout? Well, you don't know. You weren't there. Maybe the coach tried. Maybe the players didn't execute. Maybe the adjustments were made and they simply didn't work. Maybe there were problems happening on the court that you still don't understand. And all you know is somebody just handed you a jersey and you're down 21 points. And nobody resets the scoreboard because you just entered the game. Welcome to the organization. Organizations work the same way. When you enter a new environment, you don't start with a blank scoreboard. You inherit communication patterns. You inherit previous successes, previous fails. You inherit promises that somebody else made. You inherit compromises you weren't part of. You also inherit processes that may have made perfect sense 5 years ago. And sometimes you inherit what that person before you volunteered to do. That's why one of the biggest mistakes we make when entering a new organization is assuming we're starting at zero. Sometimes you're not starting at zero. Sometimes you're starting at -21, not because you've done anything wrong, because the game started before you arrived. Here's the lesson, family. Before you start questioning your ability, understand the scoreboard you inherited. Ask, what happened before I arrived? What expectations already exist and why do they exist? What problem was this behavior originally solving? What does this organization believe someone in my position should do? Because sometimes that looks dysfunctional today was completely reasonable 3 years ago. The environment changed. The expectations didn't. And before you decide who was responsible for putting those points on the board, remember, you weren't there. Study the scoreboard before deciding who caused the score. Here's 2 actionable tips I'd love for you to experiment with. Tip number 1, conducting an expectation audit before you start changing things. During your first few weeks, ask different stakeholders what they believe your role owns, what success looks like, and what they expect from you. Then compare the answers. Don't be surprised when they don't match. Those differences tell you where the invisible expectations live. Tip number 2, ask for history behind unusual process. Instead of immediately saying, "This doesn't make sense," ask, "Help me understand how we got here." That question can reveal whether you're looking at dysfunction or outdated solutions or a temporary workaround, or even maybe something you simply just don't understand. Let me say this, family. This will not be easy. I promise you're going to have challenge after challenge. I want to be upfront with you and I don't want to seem like it's a magic bullet by experiment with these actionable tips. What I do want to be clear on is that you must at least try. No, you must do, because if you do it, either way, you're going to learn more about the people you're working with as well as the organization. But again, I repeat, it will be a challenge. It will be an uphill battle because you're here in one moment that, hey, this is what you're responsible for. And then you're here in the next moment, hey, you missed this and this is what you're responsible for. So I have to forewarn you, you're going to have to adjust. Here's my professional advice. When you enter an established organization, resist the temptation to prove your value by immediately changing everything. Diagnose before you prescribe. Again, diagnose before you prescribe. Your responsibility isn't to demonstrate how much you know, it's to understand the environment well enough to determine whether your knowledge can actually help. But understanding the scoreboard introduces another problem, because I still had a question. If I'm experienced, if I'm successful at leading projects before, if I know what I'm doing, why doesn't my previous credibility count for me? Which brings me to my next thought. What if everything you accomplish proves you're capable, but still doesn't give the team a reason to trust you yet? Principle number 2, experience is portable, trust is not. Oh, this one is going to hurt. Yeah. Because when you've been doing something for a long time, you naturally carry confidence from your previous experience. You know what you survived. You know the projects you've delivered. You know the difficult stakeholders you navigate. You even know the mistakes you made, the lessons you've learned, and you even know the capability of your craft. But there's one problem. The new organization doesn't know any of that yet. The resume tells you what you've done. Your certifications tell them you've studied. The references tell them what other people experience, but none of those things can completely answer this question. Can we trust you to lead us? That answer takes time. Think about what happens when someone replaces a respected leader. A new leader can have incredible experience. They can have better credentials. They can have an impressive track record, but they don't automatically inherit the relationship the previous leader built. Because you can't transfer a title. You can transfer responsibility. You can transfer projects. You can even transfer employees. You know what? You can even transfer authority, but you cannot transfer trust. Trust has to be experienced, and project managers live inside of reality because we often lead through influence rather than formal authority. People don't have to follow us simply because our title says project manager. We have to build enough trust that people believe our leadership will help them succeed. Here's the lesson, family. Your experience may tell you that you're capable, but don't confuse your confidence in yourself with someone else's experience of you. Give people the opportunity to experience your leadership. Listen before changing anything. Understand before correcting. Ask questions before prescribing solutions. Respect the history before trying to rewrite it. Your experience belongs in the room, but so does humility. Experiment with these 2 actionable tips. Make small promises and then keep them. Trust rarely begins with some enormous leadership moment. If you say, I'll send something to you by Tuesday, send it by Tuesday. If you promise to follow up, follow up. If you tell someone you investigate an issue, close the loop. Small promises create evidence, and trust needs evidence. Tip number 2, learn what trust looks like to people you're leading. Some people trust you because you're transparent. Others value consistencies. Others need autonomy. Others, they just need communication. Don't assume everyone experiences trustworthy leadership the same way you do. Pay attention to what your stakeholders actually need. Here's my professional advice. Stop trying to make people trust your resume. Let them experience your leadership. Your credentials may establish initial credibility, but your consistency determines whether your credibility becomes trust. Experience can introduce you. Character and consistency have to stay behind after the introduction. Now, this creates another danger. Because once we realize we're being evaluated, something very human can happen. We start trying to desperately to prove ourselves. And that's where experienced professionals can lose themselves. When does being helpful stop being leadership and start teaching people to depend on you? Principle number 3, don't let yesterday's extra effort become tomorrow's identity. When you want people to trust you, it's tempting to say yes to everything. And if you're guilty of it, raise your hand. I'll say I. See, I'll take care of it. I'll write it. I'll follow up. I'll build it. I'll coordinate it. I'll fix it. I'll own it. And initially, everybody loves you. Wow, this person gets things done. But temporary assistance can quietly become permanent ownership when nobody defines the boundaries. Watch how quickly this happens. ED helped us with this because ED normally handles this, which becomes the project manager handles this. Congratulations. We've just created an organizational requirement without ever making an organizational decision. This is an argument against going above and beyond. I believe in helping people. I believe in serving your team. I believe there are moments when leadership requires you to step outside that neat little boundaries of your job description. But leadership also requires clarity, because when you continually remove accountability from other people, you may solve today's problems with creating tomorrow's dysfunction. There's a tremendous difference between I'll help you carry this and give it to me and I'll carry it from now on. Here's the lesson, family. Help without confusing support with ownership. Serve without creating dependency. Step in a gap when necessary, but don't build your permanent office inside that gap, because eventually somebody else may inherit the expectation you created, and they'll walk into the organization wondering why everyone believes something belongs to them that was never supposed to belong to the role in the first place. Here's 2 actionable tips I love for you to experiment with. Name temporary ownership when you take it. Instead of simply saying, I'll take something over, say, I can help own this for the cycle while we get caught up, and then let's determine who should own it going forward. Now you've helped someone out without silently rewriting the operating model. Tip number 2, return accountability after the crisis passes. Once the immediate problem is solved, let's close the loop. Ask, who should own this moving forward? Temporary support should have an expiration date. Otherwise, today's rescue becomes tomorrow's expectation. Here's my professional advice, family. Being indispensable sounds wonderful until the entire system requires you to function. Your goal as a leader isn't to become the person who does everything. Your goal is to help create an environment where the right people can successfully own the right things. Leadership isn't measured by how much responsibility you collect, it's measured by how much ownership you help create. That's tough, family. But there's another lesson from this experience that took me even much longer to understand, because sometimes the scoreboard isn't just measuring what you do, sometimes it's measuring how someone interprets what you do. And that's where identity enters the conversation. What if the feedback you're receiving contains something you need to hear, but the label attached to it still isn't who you are? Principle number 4, before you accept a score, understand how the points were rewarded. This is a tough one, family. I had to experience this because most of the time, when we think about what I'm about to discuss, this is probably one of the most important principles in the entire conversation. At one point in my career, I received feedback that I was defensive. That bothered me because from my perspective, when I received feedback, I wasn't trying to reject it. I was simply asking, can I provide some context? But here's something I've learned since then. My intention doesn't automatically determine someone else's perception. Maybe there were moments when I provided context too quickly. Maybe I needed to listen longer. Maybe someone hears an explanation as resistance. Maybe there's something there that I need to examine. That's maturity. But maturity also doesn't require me to immediately turn somebody's interpretation into my identity. There's a difference between someone experienced me as defensive in that situation and I'm a defensive person. Those aren't the same conclusion. This is why feedback requires discernment. Someone's perception may reveal a blind spot. Their evaluation may reveal an area where you need to grow. Their criticism, it may hurt and still contain something valuable. Listen, examine it, learn from it. But before you accept a score, understand how the points were awarded. What behavior were they evaluating? What expectations were they comparing against? What information did they have? What information didn't they have? Was I actually wrong? Could both perspectives contain the same truth? What can I learn from turning their opinion into my identity? Because the immature response to difficult feedback is, they're wrong. I'm not changing anything. But there's another unhealthy response. They said it, therefore it must be who I am. Neither one is growth. The healthier response is, let me examine this without surrendering myself to it. Here's the lesson, family. Their perception and evaluation may contain information I need to learn. But their scoreboard doesn't get the final word on who I become. Let me say that one more time. Their perception and evaluation may contain information I need to learn, but their scoreboard does not get the final word on who I become. Now, this is what we call identity. Experiment with these 2 actionable tips. Tip number 1, convert labels into observable behavior. If someone tells you you're defensive, don't spend your energy going back and forth. Ask, what did I do that gave you that impression? Now you have something you can examine. Labels attack identity. Behavior gives you information. Tip number 2, look for patterns before accepting conclusion. One person's perception is information. Repeated feedback from different people across different situations may be a pattern. Don't miss either one, but don't treat them as equivalent. Ask yourself, where else have I heard this? If the pattern keeps appearing, investigate it. If it doesn't, keep the feedback in context. Here's my professional advice, family. Never become so confident that feedback can't reach you, but never become so dependent on external validation that every piece of feedback gets to redefine you, but remain responsible for the person you're becoming. Be coachable without becoming programmable. Listen, learn, and adjust where necessary. Here's my final reflection, family. Maybe you're listening to me right now and you're starting to understand something about your own experience. Maybe you inherit a project. Maybe you inherited a team. Maybe you inherited a department. Maybe you inherited a client. Maybe you inherited an entire organization. And you're wondering why it feels like you're already behind. Why does everything you've accomplished suddenly seem like it doesn't matter? Why are things that work everywhere else are being questioned here? Why are you starting to wonder whether you're actually as capable as you thought you were before you question yourself? Look at the scoreboard. Because some of those points were on the board before you even walked into the building. You didn't create every expectation. You didn't even create every habit. You didn't damage every relationship. You didn't make every promise. You weren't responsible for every decision that brought the organization to where it is today. But family, here's where leadership begins. You may not be responsible for the score you inherited, but you're responsible for what happens while you're in the game, because sometimes you're starting against someone else's scoreboard, but you don't have to finish there. So don't spend the second half complaining about the first half. Understand it, study it, learn from it, ask what happened before you arrived, respect what deserves to be respected, challenge what needs to be challenged, build relationships, earn trust, and then start putting your own points on the board. Because sometimes you're starting against someone else's scoreboard, but you don't have to finish there. Here are my closing thoughts, family. Maybe one of the greatest lessons in the scoreboard principle is the scoreboard gives us information. It can expose patterns. It can reveal weakness. It can show us where improvement is needed, but it never supposed to become our identity, especially when we didn't create all the conditions that produce the score. So the next time somebody evaluates you, please listen. And when they give you feedback, listen. When the perception hurts, just listen. There may be something there that can help you become better. But remember, their perception and evaluation may contain information you need to learn from, but their scoreboard does not get the final word on who you become. You do. Their perception and evaluation may contain information you need to learn from, but their scoreboard does not get the final word on who you become. You do, through what you learn, through what you change, through what you refuse to carry, and through what you choose to do when it finally your turn to put points on the board. And remember, sets and reps beat talent when talent doesn't do the reps. If you're new to the episode, I go by the name of ED. For all you smart and intelligent folks out there, that just simply means Ed. Until next time.